Hello and welcome to another episode of Revel Coach Plus. And today we are lucky to have Claire Van Holland with us. And Claire, you may have remembered, she was one of our first guests when we used to call this show Tuesday at 2 back in 2019. And Claire is a creative first. She also loves crunching numbers. So she truly is one of those people that's like 50% left brain, right brain split. And she fell into data analytics, financial projections, and budget forecasting over the course of an extensive career in corporate media. So after co-founding a furniture design business with her husband, Aaron, in 2011, she realized that she really could provide more of an impact by using her corporate analytics skills and using those experiences to help creatives achieve financial autonomy through collaboration. And I love that because somebody that really has that creative mindset and creative, like knowing what it's like to be an entrepreneur, there's so many entrepreneurs that need your help on this type of stuff. So she launched the CV Ledger in early 2016, and the rest is history. So Claire, thank you and welcome back to our show.
Thank you for having me again, ladies. I'm so excited to join you today.
Well, I'd love to start off with our first question, just getting caught up. So last time we interviewed you, you were in Los Angeles, and now it sounds like we're learning that you moved. Can you tell us a little bit about your choice to move outside of LA and where you are now?
So up until about last year, exactly a year ago, I had been in LA proper for about 15 years. I'm originally from the Midwest, and I love Los Angeles. I will always have a place for Los Angeles in my heart. But I would say that with the circumstances of the last couple of years, as well as just even seeing the shift of the city within maybe the last 5 years, I could tell things were changing quickly, and I wasn't sure if that was necessarily the pace of life I wanted to continue living. My husband was on the same page, maybe him even more so than I. He had been in LA for 21 years. And so we didn't think that we were going to be in LA for, like, quite honestly, the last 3 years. 3 years ago, in our minds, we should have left already. But as work and all the things would have it, though we were doing the search and physically visiting places, you get kind of a feel of what place is going to be right or not right. And while a lot of that can be done in research and on paper, looking perfect to, everything, matching or checking off all the boxes, rather, it nothing felt quite right. And then with the pandemic, everything, of course, really slowed down. So we couldn't continue the search. We did, however, make our way to Idaho over the course of 2020, which was a little bit shocking, but I was getting really antsy, to be honest. I was like, I don't really like the feeling of this city the deeper into this pandemic that we go. And I really think that we need to just hit the road. We just need to make time and space. And oddly enough, while I was pretty busy with work in 2020, especially, my husband was very busy with work. At the very beginning of all of that, we were convinced that we might have to shutter our business, the furniture business, because we were like, well, everyone's going to be home. Who's going to buy anything? Who's going to buy anything, especially home goods? And it was quite literally the opposite of that, where it was just the highest number of sales that we'd ever seen. And so it was a little bit of a golden chain for him, because while he was making more, doing more production and making more money than ever historically that we'd had the business, it also tethered us to just not really being able to go anywhere. And so we finally pulled away. We visited Idaho in late 2020, and it was almost immediately, we visited Boise. Neither of us had ever been to Idaho before, and we knew that was it. We were like, this is it. I don't know what it is about this place, but it feels like home. It feels familiar, but different in all the right ways. It has everything we need. And so we started the search for where we would land. We were initially looking a lot closer to Boise, but I told my husband, let's go big or go home. If we're going to leave the city, then I don't want just an acre. I want land, a lot of it. And so that took our search further and further away from Boise, because all we could really get within Boise proper was about 1 to 2 acres. So we're now 2 hours outside of Boise in the country. And we have 10 acres. We've got a shop, a barn, pasture. We have horses that are, hanging out on our pasture, for the time being. And it is so lovely. And 1 year later, we don't really look back. It's such a nice, welcome change of pace. And it was exactly what we were looking for, just in terms of shifting gears within our lifestyle.
And Claire, that's so inspiring to have, because often we get set in a certain routine, and that routine a lot of times depends on where we live, or, where you meet your spouse. And so we always say, we want to help inspire people to put their dreams into action, and betting on yourself, betting on your family. Like, moving is one of those things. My husband and I moved a ton before we moved here in Florida, and people always thought we were crazy with little kids. They're like, why do you move so much? We're like, because we can. And so you can always move back. And so I admire your, confidence and betting on yourself and just exploring it.
Yeah, no, likewise. We didn't know anyone in Idaho, I mean, at the time. And then it turned out I knew a couple of folks from college after the fact, which was awesome. But really we had no base. And whenever anyone asks us, oh, well, do you have family here? Do you have anything, anyone familiar prior to moving? And it was like, no, we're just throwing down roots, and, literal, figuratively. We want to grow our own food and live sustainably, almost entirely on our own. We want to know where the source of our food is coming from. And that was really, really important to us long term. So to finally be able to put, action, to thought and idea it's amazing. And with it, comes a whole plethora of other opportunities, which I find really, really exciting. And we haven't really been in the space of that kind of creativity and inspiration for a really long time, at least not in the city. So yeah, it's a good place to be.
So Claire, you had mentioned to us before we started that you want to have regenerative farming. So
Yes.
Tell me about the dream that you have, and how it's starting and where you hope it goes.
Yeah. We, so for the last couple of years, my husband has been studying and reading up on permaculture and regenerative agriculture, really with the intention of just trying to understand how can plants, different types of plants, different species, really work with one another. And so he thankfully grew up on a farm in Oregon, so it's not completely unfamiliar, but being the youngest of three boys, he wasn't exactly either required to be on the farm the same way that his brothers were. So he has it in his bones. He didn't really ever have to do it back in the day, but he was always really motivated by that. And he's always had a very green thumb naturally. So the more and more he got into that study, the more we realized and refined exactly what it was that we needed. And so that was sort of just how Idaho as a location really opened up for us. Getting here, we're big believers, as him and I are both entrepreneurs, that if you're going to do something, you should do everything, even if you don't like the job, so that you know how it works, and then you can kind of just grow it from there. And so with the 10 acres that we have, our intention is to just grow as much of our own food, go through the trials and tribulations, understand what these cycles of season really look like for certain types of plants, and how does that in turn trickle down to building community, and how does that trickle down to just feeding ourselves and everyone around us. And then even more so, the intention is, if we can figure out a way to do that and really kind of get into a rhythm of how it makes sense for maybe not just our climate, but for different climates. There is a principle and a philosophy and so many other things that go with that around regenerative ag. And so how can we inspire other people to do the same, maybe with smaller plots of land? Because no one needs 10 acres. And this is what I'm finding as well, being less versed in regenerative ag than my husband. You don't need 10 acres or even a full acre to grow your own food that will be abundant enough for your family. You actually need a very small plot of land. And it's just understanding how all those different plants, vegetables, fruit, all of that, trees, how do they all work together so that within this space, one feeds the other, feeds the other, feeds the other, whether it's because of ground cover, because of the position of the sun throughout different points of the year. And so we're going to do that through trial and error. And once we get that sort of worked out on our own, then the idea is to create a space for other folks to learn, for us to just kind of show by example what we've learned, in hopes that people are inspired to do that for themselves and for their families and, whatever the case may be. Because I think the reality is there is enough food in this country, but we have been so reliant on the corporate system of, okay, we're going to get all our mangoes from Mexico, when it's like, yeah, that's fine and great and everything. And I love mangoes, but at the same time, we should as a society be shifting back to what are the seasons that we're living in proper within our geographic areas? And what are the foods that are going to help us, really sustain our health, for the longer term during that period of time? Because those plants are there and they're going to grow, and they're going to grow within your region. So we should all know what those are inherently, so that we can feed our families more in line with the cycles of the seasons that we're living in. And maybe from there we can build upon our health. But, there's not very much money to be made in that. So, so we're going to just start, with our tiny little farm for now and see where we go. But, I've spoken to so many people since I have moved, and even leading up to the time of moving, and the number of times folks have told me you were literally living my dream. I laugh and I'm like, well, I will keep you posted, because once we kind of just get into a better swing of it, after we've lived here a couple of seasons and seen, the sort of cycle of our own, crops, then we can show you guys and we can provide you some sort of platform and support around what that starts to look like in our own way.
Well, I think that's like, you just nailed it right there with why people don't actually take the step, because they feel like you're living a dream, in the sense that, like, if I could tap into your right and left brain, people have these dreams. And then when they get to the spreadsheet of how to make it work, they say, well, how am I going to do this? And I can even just do it with many things. So how do you go about making sure that, so I'll say it in a different way. Often, like when we think of like launching a program, all these great ideas, the brainstorm's magical. And then when you go mathematically of how much it'll take to kind of pull it off, or travel in person, or, flights and next, like the profit margin isn't there. And so you're like, okay, and you go to something else. So how do you go into, with your creative side, with your husband, passion, like, let's figure out how to do this, while looking at the numbers and be like, okay, is this really feasible? How do we do this?
Yeah, I think for something like this, and the mindset that I've been in lately, especially since being in the country, is for this, we're not even looking at the numbers. We're looking at primarily just our own sustainability, because if we can make it happen, then that. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I'm also a huge believer in is that there are always the resources there to make whatever it is we want happen. Whether or not they make themselves known to us in this very moment or not, they're there. And it's going to be a lot of money to build out some sort of ADU units, or, just to put the like plumbing, to even have space for people to stay in dwellings on our property that my husband and I find acceptable, that sort of thing. But I believe, especially with in the state of, and I have to do the research around this, right? But I know it exists just from loose conversations with folks in and around the area. But there are grants for first-time farmers. There are all there are grants for female farmers. There are all kinds of things out there, especially specific to the state of Idaho, that are very supportive of even soil regeneration, which is exactly what we are doing just by default. So how many boxes can we check just by virtue of the things that we are just doing within what we have resource-wise at this moment? And once we start understanding the bigger picture of, okay, well, this is what this is creating, and this is what this is creating. Oh, well, then we actually qualify for X, Y, and Z. And that is, so I think it will be a slower kind of development for sure. But I think we start with just literally planting the seeds and literally mulching the dirt and just getting our hands dirty. And I am a firm believer that with that, we will come to being able to sort of just fund the rest of it, because we're not in it for selling. We're just not, selling produce or anything like that. I mean, if anything, we would probably just barter and trade with friends of ours, here and there, which I think is awesome. And it's kind of already started to happen a little bit, with what few crops we've had in the year that we've been here. So there'll be some level of that. And I imagine that'll probably just continue to like grow even more. I do believe what you put out will come back to you. And so I think of this particular endeavor, not really so much as money, being a money person, which sounds really out of the box, I realize. But I think that for something that is so heart-centric to both my husband and I just know that it will work out however it is, probably maybe not even in ways that we would have expected or anticipated ever, but I know it'll work out. So, and the numbers will work out for themselves in the time frame that they will. So yeah, it is quite unplanned.
Yeah, the universe provides, right? When you look for it, it's there. But I've got it's a really simple, basic question. So you mentioned about being able to find grants, and so you've heard probably about those. How would you go about doing some research to try to find out where you could find those grants? Is that an easy process? Is that going to the town hall, the library, just talking to your neighbors?
Yeah, I think it's sort of like all of the above. So we had found out when we went to the botanical gardens in our local town that there was, I'm going to space on the name of the local organization, but if you wanted to plant windbreak trees for your property, that they would actually provide you a grant to do just that, which we've already kind of planted some of the windbreak, just at least for our initial garden, but for the back part of the property, because we don't have any trees on our property, which is like a blessing and a curse, because we are working with nothing, which is exciting and also terrifying. But so we will need to put in windbreaks because it's very windy where we live. We live in canyons. So it's tapping resources, being able to just have conversations with community members first and foremost. Everybody is so generous with information around here, always so willing to help. I would say even more so than I've ever experienced in my life. That's the beauty, I suppose, of living in the country, but everyone is so generous. And so giving us names to different organizations that would provide that. But then furthermore, also, just kind of keeping on tap with other sort of more national type organizations that are really associated with the types of initiatives that, fall in line with generally what we're doing. So soil regeneration, 100%. We are naturally already doing that. And by having horses on our property, we already have like manure and fertilizer naturally, which is awesome. It's really, really awesome. And so being able to just, again, going back to this idea of like using what you have, So we are very much doing soil regeneration. And then, maybe there are other organizations around regenerative agriculture. And then it's also as well just reaching out to social media folks who are also kind of in a very similar spot and space. Those folks I have found, some of whom are influencers, some aren't, are always so more than willing to share that sort of information, because as homesteaders, I guess, we could probably start to eventually call ourselves that. Not quite yet, but, we're sort of moving to that general direction, or some form of it. Is homesteaders always want other people to be able to share in this, the same health and wealth that they are engaging in. And so, and I feel that, because it affects our environment, it affects the planet, it affects, the supply chain system with our food and everything. So why wouldn't we, in just even the smallest of ways, start to just try to contribute to that? So yeah, I have no, I can see the resources abundant, all around, and it has been just wonderful to be able to just tap in and easily obtain those as we need it. And I honestly haven't really even begun to scratch the surface of hardcore looking at grants just yet. I want us to get our property and our farm, and our crops just a little bit further along, so that I can kind of see the breadth and understand exactly the direction of how this all kind of interplays on a larger scale.
Well, we've noticed a trend, like people used to define success just as your title and your compensation, kind of two things. And now it really is broad, and where those are such smaller pieces of the pie. So your work is like a legacy, like it's shifting how a community depends or not depend on the current American food system, the food chain, which is, it's kind of asinine when you speak numbers, like how that one mango can get to your doorstep, and all the trucks and gas and planes to get there. Like, how is that less expensive than what I could grow in my own backyard? So it is kind of, mind boggling on when you really start thinking about it like that.
Yeah, it's, I will say, like, since we've been here in the country, to see the vast difference in prices, and granted, the cost of living is not quite what it was, in LA, of course, but to even get anything locally sourced within LA, you were paying an arm and a leg, and understandably so, for X, Y, and Z reasons. There's just so many more people, there's so much more demand, et cetera, et cetera. But here in the country, that's just the standard, that's just the norm. So to be able to drink milk out of glass bottles that is local, like that's, it's what normal milk costs. I just, and then local honey. Yeah, honey is always a little bit expensive, but the selection of, even like local honey, it's amazing. And it's not $1 million, which is what it feels like in a bigger city. And so we have, while our variety of food is, not as high as it was in the city, the quality of food that we're getting by eating locally, eating at home, starting to grow a lot of our own fruits and vegetables, or just exchanging with friends, has been really quite impressive. Like, I feel healthier. I feel more energized. I, was able to combat really, really bad allergies that I hadn't had since I lived in the Midwest, this past spring. And I figured that out on my own, just by looking at the different plant species on our property and realizing that we were abundantly growing stinging nettle. Like, it just grows everywhere out here. Stinging nettle is very native to Idaho. And even furthermore, the nutrient properties almost exceed kale. Like, they do exceed kale. When I read through and did the research, I was blown away. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to pick some carefully because it has the stingers, and I'm going to boil it, blanch it, and I'm just going to make a tea out of it. And I'm going to see what happens, mix it with local honey. And immediately, I kid you not, like the next day, I went from just my whole head exploding from allergies to just being totally fine. And so I could go on about stinging nettle as a whole other separate topic, but yeah, so the land that we're on, the resources that we have, we always have what we need to just go above and beyond. And agreed that abundance and success really at this point in time, I believe, supersede title and compensation. I don't even really care about that stuff anymore. It's how can I be comfortable in my life? How can I lead some, a sustainable life and share the knowledge with others as much as possible? And we'll go from there. We'll see what happens.
We can all thrive with community. We need that community. Claire Van Holland, if somebody wanted to reach out and find more about regenerative agriculture and find out about your journey, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so so the Instagram handle is actually my husband's, but he's really good at recording all of that since he's always out in the pasture. But that handle is Future Primitive Farm on Instagram. We don't have anything super formal yet, but the long-term vision is just depending on what we're able to create within the resources on our property, just doing like small batch, like runs of different types of products that we can, just produce straight from here. And it'll just be kind of a fun thing. We're not looking in it to just mass produce and create any kind of empire as much as it's sort of just like, well, this season we decided to, do like a stinging nettle hair salve or hair paste, conditioning hair paste, that sort of thing. Or here's my blend of honeysuckle and nettle teas that are healing for X, Y, and Z reasons.
I want to try some.
Yeah, no, the tea is, it's funny because the tea is something that I actually was very adamant about doing even prior to moving. I was like, I don't know why I have it in my mind that when we move to the country, I'm going to just make tea blends, but it's there. And so now that I know that the nettle is growing abundantly everywhere, there will be lots of nettle type products coming from me personally in the not so distant future.
Well, how exciting. I want to thank you so much for stopping by and spending this time with us and with our community. I have learned a lot. Idaho's now on my bucket list of places I'd like to go. I'd love to come out and see your farm, see what you're doing. It sounds really fantastic. And I really do want to try some of your tea.
Yes, I will we'll stay in touch about that. I will absolutely send you some as soon as I have a good batch ready to go.
Well, on behalf of me, Alison, Nissen, and my sister, Marcy Stoudt, this is Revel Coach Plus, and we are so glad that you've been able to spend this time with us.